They say a gift from family is a blessing. Mine came wrapped in a glossy brochure and a one-way ticket to Alaska. I should have been grateful. Instead, I stood outside my son's window and heard 5 words that changed everything. Some trips aren't meant for memories. They're meant for graves. But here's the thing about old men. We're harder to bury than they think. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments section where you're watching from, so I'll know how far my story has gone.
I didn't know silence had a sound until Rita died. It's not the absence of noise. That would be easier. It's the presence of nothing. The hum of the refrigerator becomes a drone you can't unhear. The wall clock in the kitchen ticks like a metronome, counting down to something you can't name. Even the house itself seems to hold its breath, waiting for her to walk through the door and fill the rooms with that laugh that always came too loud and stayed too long. She's been gone 11 months now. 11 months of eating dinner at 5:30 p.m. sharp because that's what we always did. 11 months of folding one set of towels instead of 2. 11 months of talking to a woman who isn't there, just to hear a voice that isn't my own. The routines keep me sane. Or maybe they keep me numb. I can't tell the difference anymore. Sunday, 3 p.m. My phone rings. "You doing okay, Dad?" Trevor's voice is steady, predictable. He asks the same question every week, and I give him the same answer. "Fine, son. You?" "Busy. Work's crazy. Vanessa says hi." Vanessa has never said hi. Not once. Not at our wedding anniversary dinner 6 years ago when she spent the entire meal texting under the table. Not at Rita's funeral when she stood by the dessert table like she was waiting for permission to leave. And certainly not now, when I'm a 71-year-old man living alone in a house that's too big and too quiet. But I don't correct him. What's the point? "That's good," I say. "Tell her I said hello." We talk for exactly 9 minutes. Then he has to go. Something about a conference call. Something about Vanessa needing the car. Something. I hang up and stare at the phone in my hand, wondering when my son became a stranger who schedules his obligation to me like a dentist appointment. The days blur together now. I water Rita's roses even though I hate gardening. I watch Jeopardy every night at 7:30, shouting answers at the screen like she used to. I keep her coffee mug on the counter, unwashed, because it still smells faintly of hazelnut creamer and her. But last Tuesday, something shifted. I went to Safeway for milk and bread. Simple, routine, forgettable. I walked the aisles, grabbed what I needed, paid, and stepped into the parking lot. Then I stopped. I couldn't remember where I'd parked. Not the general area, not the row, nothing. I stood there holding a plastic bag in each hand, scanning row after row of cars, my heart hammering in my chest like it was trying to escape. 20 minutes? That's how long it took before a woman with kind eyes and a Diamondbacks cap asked if I needed help. She walked me to my truck. I thanked her. I drove home. And that night I sat in front of my laptop and typed, "Early signs of dementia." I closed it before I could read past the first paragraph. I didn't tell Trevor. Because if I did, he'd have a reason to worry. and worry turns into decisions, and decisions turn into phone calls about assisted living and power of attorney and all the things that mean you're no longer in control of your own life. So I said nothing, and the silence grew louder.
Trevor called on a Thursday, not a Sunday, not 3 p.m., a Thursday at 6:47 p.m., which meant something was different. My stomach tightened before I even answered. "Hey, Dad." His voice had that forced brightness people use when they're about to ask for something or tell you something you don't want to hear. "Trevor, everything okay?" Yeah, everything's fine. Just wanted to check in, see how you're doing." I pressed the phone closer to my ear, searching for something real beneath the script. "I'm all right. Same as always." There was a pause. I could hear Vanessa's voice in the background, muffled but insistent. He covered the phone, badly, and I caught fragments. Just say it. Why are you dragging this out?" When he came back, his tone had shifted. Warmer. Rehearsed. "So, Dad, Vanessa and I have been talking, and we want to do something special for you. You've been through a lot this past year, and we thought, how about a cruise?" I blinked. "A cruise?" "Yeah, Alaska. 7 days, all expenses paid. You leave from Seattle next Friday." My first instinct was to say no. Not because I didn't want to go, but because gifts like this don't come without strings. People don't suddenly decide their 71-year-old father deserves a vacation unless they're trying to fix something or get rid of something. But I didn't say that. Instead, I said, "Trevor, that's really generous of you. But you don't have to." "We want to, Dad. You deserve it. Mom would have wanted you to do something like this." There it was again. The card he knew I couldn't argue with. I swallowed hard. "That's very kind of you both." "Great. I'll email you the details tonight. The ticket's already booked. You just need to pack and show up." "Will you and Vanessa be joining me?" Another pause. Longer this time. No. We can't get away right now. Work's insane. But you'll have a great time. Trust me." I wanted to ask why they'd book a trip they couldn't take. I wanted to ask why now, after months of 9-minute phone calls and surface-level check-ins. I wanted to ask if he remembered that his mother and I took him on a cruise to the Bahamas when he was 12, and he spent the entire week seasick and miserable, swearing he'd never set foot on a boat again. But I didn't ask any of that, because asking would mean I admitted I didn't trust him. And admitting that would mean accepting that somewhere between his childhood and now, we'd stopped being father and son and started being strangers who shared a last name. "That sounds wonderful," I said. "Thank you." "No problem, Dad. I'll send everything over. Take care of yourself." "You too, son." The line went dead. I sat there, in the kitchen, staring at the phone in my hand, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock, and for the first time in 11 months, I felt something worse than loneliness. I felt forgotten. The FedEx truck pulled up on Saturday morning. I wasn't expecting anything. I never am. The driver, a kid who couldn't have been older than 25, handed me a thick envelope with Trevor's return address printed in the corner. "Have a good one, sir," he said, already halfway back to his truck. I stood on the porch, turning the envelope over in my hands. It was heavier than I expected. Official, the kind of weight that comes with documents you're supposed to read carefully before signing. Inside was a glossy folder embossed with the logo of Grand View Cruise Lines. I opened it slowly, like it might bite. A single ticket slid out onto the kitchen table. Passenger name, Jackson Mercer.
Departure, Seattle, Washington, October 18th. Destination, Juneau, Sitka, Ketchikan. 7-day Alaskan discovery voyage. Cabin, Ocean View, Deck 9. One ticket, one name, one cabin. I stared at it for a long time, trying to understand what I was holding. Trevor had said, all expenses paid, but this wasn't just a ticket. This was a full itinerary. Boarding passes, cabin assignment, meal vouchers, even a spa credit for $200. $200 for a massage I'd never use. I picked up my phone and almost called him. Almost. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way he'd rushed me off the phone on Thursday. Maybe it was the way Vanessa's voice had sounded in the background, like she was checking items off a to-do list. Or maybe it was the fact that in 43 years of marriage, Rita and I had talked about taking a cruise exactly once. She'd wanted to see the glaciers in Alaska. I'd told her we'd go someday. Someday never came. And now Trevor was sending me alone? I set the ticket down and walked to the living room where a framed photo of Rita sat on the mantel. She was laughing in it, head thrown back, eyes crinkled at the corners, caught mid-joke at our anniversary dinner in Sedona. I'd taken that picture with a disposable camera, and it had turned out blurry and overexposed, but it was my favorite because it was real. "What do you think?" I asked her. "Should I go?" She didn't answer. She never did anymore. I went back to the kitchen and reread the ticket. Everything about it was perfect. Too perfect. The dates lined up with no conflicts. The cabin was pre-selected. The itinerary was printed and laminated like I might lose it otherwise. It felt prepared. Like someone had planned this a long time ago and was just waiting for the right moment to hand it over. I thought about calling Trevor again, asking him why now? Why alone? Why a cruise to the one place his mother had always wanted to see but never got to? But I didn't. Because part of me, the part that still wanted to believe my son loved me, didn't want to hear the answer. Instead, I folded the ticket back into the glossy folder and placed it on the counter next to Rita's unwashed coffee mug. And I told myself it was a gift. Just a gift. Nothing more. But that night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about the way Vanessa's voice had sounded through the phone. Just say it. Why are you dragging this out? Like she was tired of waiting. I wrote the thank you card on Sunday afternoon. It took me 3 tries to get it right. The first one felt too formal. The second, too desperate. The third was simple. Thank you for thinking of me. It means more than you know. Dad. I sealed it in an envelope and drove to Chandler. Trevor and Vanessa lived in a townhouse community off Alma School Road, one of those cookie-cutter developments where every unit looks identical except for the house numbers. I'd only been there twice, once when they moved in, once for a strained Thanksgiving dinner where Vanessa served store-bought rolls and Trevor checked his phone between every course. The sun was setting as I pulled up, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that Rita would have called God's favorite colors. The street lights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows across the pavement. I parked across the street and sat there for a moment, the card resting on the passenger seat, beside the cruise ticket I'd brought to show them, proof that I'd received it, proof that I was grateful, proof that I was still worth the effort. I got out and walked slowly toward their front door. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the distant hum of traffic on the 202 and the occasional bark of a dog. My footsteps sounded too loud against the concrete. As I approached the door, I noticed their living room window was cracked open, probably to let in the cooler evening air. I could see the warm glow of their television through the blinds, hear the muffled sound of voices inside. I raised my hand to knock. Then I heard Trevor's voice. "One-way ticket. He's not coming back." I froze. My hand hung in the air, knuckles inches from the door. My brain scrambled to make sense of what I'd just heard, to find some other explanation, some other context that would make those words mean something different. But then Vanessa laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was soft, almost relieved, like someone exhaling after holding their breath for too long. "Finally," she said. The word cut through me like a blade. I stood there, unable to move, unable to breathe. The thank you card felt like lead in my hand. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears, drowning out everything else. One-way ticket. He's not coming back. Finally. I took a step back, then another. My legs felt disconnected from my body, moving on autopilot while my mind tried to catch up. I didn't knock. I didn't confront them. I didn't demand an explanation. I just walked back to my truck, got in, and drove. The roads blurred together. Streetlights passed overhead like metronomes, counting seconds I couldn't account for. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't do anything. I just drove through the dark, the headlights cutting through the night like questions I didn't know how to ask. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a long time, staring at the envelope still clutched in my hand. The card I'd written to thank my son for a gift that was supposed to kill me. I left it on the dashboard and walked inside. The house was silent. The clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. And for the first time since Rita died, I understood what it felt like to be truly alone. I didn't turn on the lights when I got home. I just sat at the kitchen table in the dark, the cruise ticket laid out in front of me like evidence at a crime scene. The glossy paper caught the faint glow from the streetlight outside, making the words shimmer. Departure, October 18th, 6 days from now. Maybe I misheard. That's what I told myself for the first hour. Voices carry strangely through windows. Words get twisted. Context gets lost. Maybe Trevor was talking about someone else, a coworker, a friend, someone who wasn't his father. But then I remembered Vanessa's laugh. Finally. You don't say finally about a stranger. I closed my eyes and tried to summon better memories. Trevor at 7, running to me with a scraped knee from falling off his bike, tears streaming down his face while I cleaned the wound and told him he was braver than he thought he was. Trevor at 18, walking across the stage at his high school graduation, catching my eye in the crowd and giving me that small, proud nod. Trevor at 26, asking me to be his best man, shaking as he read his vows to Vanessa under a desert sunset. Where did that boy go? When did he become someone who could book his father a one-way trip to nowhere and call it a gift? I opened my eyes and stared at the ticket again. The anger came slowly, like a tide creeping up a beach. It started as a dull ache in my chest, then spread through my veins until my hands trembled against the table. They thought I was disposable, a burden, A problem that could be solved with a glossy brochure and a 7-day cruise to Alaska. They thought I was weak, old, forgettable. I picked up the ticket and held it to the light, studying every detail. The cabin number, the departure time, the itinerary that had been planned down to the minute. They'd put thought into this, effort, maybe even money. And suddenly I wasn't sad anymore. I was clear-headed. If my son wanted me gone, he'd have to do better than this. If Vanessa thought she could erase me with a laugh and a one-way ticket, she was wrong. I wasn't some confused old man who'd stumbled into his own execution. I was Jackson Mercer. I'd survived 43 years of marriage, raised a son, buried a wife, and kept breathing when the silence tried to bury me too. And if they wanted me gone, they'd have to earn it. I folded the ticket carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then I whispered into the dark, "Let's see how this plays out."
I became invisible on purpose. The next morning I called Trevor, kept my voice light, a little shaky, just enough to sound like the confused old man they expected me to be. "Hey, son, I can't quite remember. When does that cruise leave again?" There was a pause. Then Trevor's voice, patient but strained. "Friday, Dad, October 18th. I emailed you the details." Right, Friday. And you said it was 7 days." "Yes, 7 days." His tone had shifted, tighter, like he was forcing himself not to sigh. "Everything's in the packet I sent you. Just bring your ID and boarding pass." "Got it. Thanks, son." I hung up before he could say anything else. The trick to being underestimated is giving people exactly what they expect. So I played the part, the widower whose memory was slipping, whose sharpness had dulled with grief and age. I repeated questions, I misplaced things on purpose. I let silences stretch too long on the phone. And I watched. Over the next 3 days, I drove past their townhouse twice, once at noon, once after dark. I parked a block away and observed. Trevor left for work at 7:30 a.m. sharp, returned around 6 p.m. Vanessa's Tesla stayed in the driveway most days, except for Tuesday when she left at 10 a.m. and didn't return until late afternoon, shopping bags in hand. On Wednesday, I called again. This time, I asked about travel insurance. "Do I need to buy extra insurance for the cruise? I saw something online about—" "No, Dad," Trevor cut me off quickly. Too quickly. "It's already included. Everything's covered. You don't need to worry about anything." "Oh, that's good. What kind of coverage?" Another pause. "The standard stuff. Medical emergencies, trip cancellations, it's all in the fine print." "And if something happens to me on the ship?" The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. "Nothing's going to happen to you, Dad. It's a cruise, not a war zone." "Right, of course." But his voice had wavered, just a fraction, just enough. I hung up and opened Rita's old gardening journal, a leather-bound notebook she'd used to track planting schedules and fertilizer notes. I'd found it in the garage weeks ago and kept it on my nightstand, unable to throw it away. Now it had a new purpose. Inside, beneath her neat handwriting about rose bushes and soil pH levels, I started my own notes. October 14th. Called Trevor. Asked about insurance. He said everything's covered. Deflected when I asked specifics. October 15th. Checked mail at their house. Forwarding still active from when I helped with the mortgage paperwork last year. Found letter from Southwest Credit Collections. Amount due, $47,000. Account holder, Trevor Mercer. That letter changed everything.
I'd picked it up from their mailbox on Tuesday evening while they were both out. Slid it into my jacket, brought it home, steamed it open carefully over the kettle like I'd seen in old movies. $47,000. The letter was dated 3 weeks ago. It referenced final notice and legal action pending. There were other papers, too. Credit card statements, a notice from a payday loan company, something about a garnished paycheck. My son was drowning, and I was the life insurance policy. On Thursday morning, I called Grandview Cruise Lines. Hi, yes, I'm confirming my booking for the October 18th departure to Alaska. Name's Jackson Mercer. The woman on the other end was cheerful, efficient. Let me pull that up for you, Mr. Mercer. Ah, yes, here we are. Cabin 9D, Ocean View. All set. Great, and I just wanted to double-check. My son mentioned there was life insurance included in the package? Oh, yes, sir. That's part of our premium travel protection plan. In the event of, well, any unfortunate incident during your voyage, your listed beneficiary would receive coverage up to $500,000. My hand tightened around the phone. And who's listed as my beneficiary? Let me see. Trevor Mercer, relationship, son. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat at the kitchen table, Rita's journal open in front of me, and wrote, "They're not sending me on a vacation. They're cashing me in."
I ran into her at the Walgreens on Montezuma Street. I'd gone in for aspirin. My hands had been shaking since the phone call with the cruise line, and I thought maybe my blood pressure was spiking. I was standing in the pain relief aisle, staring at bottles I couldn't focus on, when I heard a voice behind me. "Jackson!" I turned. She was wearing navy blue scrubs and had her hair pulled back in a ponytail, different from the Diamondbacks cap she'd worn that day in the Safeway parking lot, but I recognized her immediately. The same kind eyes, the same easy smile. "Rachel," I said, surprised I remembered her name. "You remembered." She seemed genuinely pleased. "How've you been? Find your truck okay these days?" It was a gentle joke, no cruelty in it, just warmth. "Yeah, no more parking lot adventures." I tried to smile, but it felt thin. Her expression shifted. She tilted her head slightly, studying me the way nurses do, not invasive, just observant. "You okay? You look a little pale." "I'm fine, just tired." She didn't push, but she didn't leave either. Instead, she picked up a bottle of aspirin from the shelf and handed it to me. "This one's better if your stomach's sensitive, the coated kind." I took it. "Thanks." We stood there in a moment in the fluorescent hum of the pharmacy aisle, and I realized how long it had been since someone had looked at me like I was worth noticing. "You getting lunch?" she asked. "There's a diner across the street. Best patty melt in Prescott. My treat." I should have said no. I had things to do. More mail to check, more notes to write, more pieces of my son's betrayal to catalog. But I said yes. The diner was called Millie's, and Rachel was right. The patty melt was perfect. We sat in a corner booth with cracked red vinyl seats, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. She told me she worked at the VA clinic part-time, that she'd moved to Prescott 2 years ago after her divorce, that she had a daughter in college studying marine biology in San Diego. I told her about Rita, about the roses I still watered, about the silence. She listened the way people rarely do anymore, without checking their phone, without interrupting, without offering empty reassurances. And then, without planning to, I said, "My son's sending me on a cruise." "That's nice," she said, sipping her iced tea. "To Alaska." "Beautiful place.
I went once, years ago. You'll love it." I hesitated. Then, "He's not coming with me." She set her glass down. "Oh." "He says it's a gift for everything I've been through." Rachel didn't respond right away. She just watched me, her expression careful, like she was reading between the lines. "Do you want to go?" she asked quietly. It was such a simple question, but no one had asked it. "I don't know," I admitted. "Something about it feels off." She nodded slowly. "Trust that feeling." "You think I'm being paranoid?" "I think you're being smart." She leaned forward slightly. "Jackson, I've worked with a lot of families, and I've seen what happens when people stop listening to their gut." I looked down at my hands, rough and spotted with age. "What if I'm wrong?" "Then you're wrong," she said. "But what if you're right?" We sat in silence for a moment. Then she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "If you need anything, and I mean anything, you call me, okay?" I nodded. For the first time in months, I didn't feel alone.
Trevor had borrowed my socket wrench set in July. I remembered because it was the weekend Rita's roses had finally bloomed after months of struggling in the heat. He'd needed them to fix Vanessa's car, something about a loose alternator belt, and promised to return them the following week. He never did. On Friday morning, I texted him, "Hey son, need those tools back, working on the garage. Mind if I swing by and grab them?" His response came 20 minutes later. "At work until 6. Vanessa's at her sister's in Tucson. Tools are in the hall closet. Door code is 7743. Perfect. I drove to Chandler at noon, when the neighborhood was quiet and empty, let myself in with the code. The house smelled like vanilla candles and something faintly chemical, probably cleaning products Vanessa used obsessively. The tools were exactly where Trevor said they'd be. I could have grabbed them and left, but I didn't. I stood in the hallway, listening to the silence, and thought about the letter I'd found. The debt, the life insurance, the cold calculation in Vanessa's voice. Finally. I needed to know more. Trevor's home office was upstairs, second door on the right. I climbed slowly, each step deliberate, like I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. The office was small, desk, laptop, filing cabinet, a framed photo of him and Vanessa on their wedding day. I started with the desk drawers. The first was junk, pens, chargers, old receipts. The second had files, mortgage documents, tax returns, nothing unusual, but the third drawer was locked. I found the key taped under the desk lamp. Inside was a black moleskin notebook. I opened it. The first few pages were mundane, meeting notes, work reminders, grocery lists. But then, halfway through, the handwriting changed, became tighter, more urgent. September 3rd. Called Desert Sky Casino. They're threatening legal action. V says her parents won't help again. We're out of options. September 12th. Looked into refinancing. Denied. Credit score too low. V suggested selling the house. I told her we'd lose everything. September 20th. Dad's alone now. No one checking on him. No one would question it if something happened. My chest tightened. September 24th. V found the travel insurance policy. $500K if something happens during a trip. She says it's enough to clear everything and start over. September 28th. Maybe this is mercy. He won't suffer. The ship has medical staff. It'll look natural. Heart attack. Stroke. He's old. It happens. October 1st. Booked the cruise. 1 ticket. 1 cabin. V says to make sure the insurance clears first. I had to sit down.
My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the notebook. I read the entries again, slower this time, hoping I'd misunderstood. But the words didn't change. Maybe this is mercy. I pulled out my phone and photographed every page. Then I opened Trevor's laptop. Password was Vanessa's birthday, written on a sticky note inside the drawer, and found her email account still logged in. The drafts folder had 3 unsent messages. The first was to a lawyer, inquiring about estate settlement timelines and beneficiary payout procedures. The second was to the cruise line, confirming life insurance coverage is active for passenger Jackson Mercer, departure October 18th. The third was to Trevor, dated 2 days ago. Make sure he actually gets on the ship. If he backs out, we're screwed. I photographed those too. Then I closed the laptop, put everything back exactly as I'd found it, and walked downstairs. The socket wrenches were still in the hall closet. I picked them up and left. As I drove home, I didn't feel angry. I felt hollow, because somewhere in those pages, beneath the desperation and the cruelty, I'd seen my son, the boy who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms, who'd cried when his goldfish died, who'd once told me I was his hero. And I realized the worst part wasn't that he wanted me dead. It was that he'd convinced himself it was mercy.
Trevor called on Thursday evening, 2 days before the cruise. "Hey, Dad. Vanessa and I thought it'd be nice to have you over for dinner tomorrow night. You know, a little send-off before your trip." His voice was warm, practiced. "That sounds nice," I said. "Great. Come around 6. We'll grill out." I arrived at 6:15, deliberately late. Rachel pulled up behind me in her Honda Civic. I'd asked her to come, told her I needed a witness, someone who could see what I was seeing. She'd agreed, without hesitation. Trevor answered the door with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dad, right on time." Then he noticed Rachel. "Oh, I didn't know you were bringing anyone." "This is Rachel, a friend from town. Hope that's all right." "Of course. The more the merrier." His smile tightened. Vanessa appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. Her expression flickered. Surprise, then annoyance, then forced politeness. "Rachel, lovely to meet you." She extended a hand. "Jackson's told us so much about you." I'd never mentioned Rachel to them. We sat on the patio while Trevor grilled steaks. The evening air was cool, the sun sinking behind the roofline, casting everything in amber light. Vanessa poured wine. Expensive, I noticed. The kind you don't open unless you're celebrating. Or saying goodbye. "So, Dad," Trevor said, flipping a steak, "you excited about tomorrow?" "I am," I said. "It's generous, really. You deserve it." He didn't look at me when he said it. Rachel sipped her wine and smiled. "Alaska's beautiful this time of year. Jackson's lucky to have family that cares so much." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "We do what we can." "Must have been expensive," Rachel said, her tone light but pointed. "Cruises aren't cheap." "We saved up," Trevor said quickly. I watched him, the way his shoulders tensed, the way his hand gripped the spatula a little too hard. "That's very thoughtful," I said, "especially with everything else you've got going on." Trevor's eyes snapped to mine. "What do you mean?" "Work, life. Vanessa mentioned how busy you've been." Vanessa hadn't mentioned anything, but Trevor didn't know that. "Yeah, busy." He turned back to the grill. Dinner was strained. We made small talk, weather, sports, Rachel's daughter in San Diego. But underneath every word was a current of tension, like a wire pulled too tight. Halfway through the meal, Vanessa leaned forward. "Jackson, I just want you to know, this trip is about you. Taking care of yourself. You've been through so much." Her eyes were wet, actual tears. It was a good performance. I appreciate that. Really. You've been so kind. Trevor exhaled, relief flooding his face. "So you're definitely going? No cold feet?" I set down my fork and looked at him. Really looked at him. At the man who used to be my son. "I'm going," I said. Vanessa's smile was immediate. Trevor's face softened. Rachel glanced at me, concern flickering in her eyes. "I wouldn't miss it," I continued. "After all, it's not every day someone gives you a gift like this." Trevor raised his glass. "To new adventures." Vanessa clinked hers against his. "To fresh starts." I lifted mine and met Rachel's gaze across the table. "To clarity," I said. We drank, and as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, I saw it, just for a second, the flash of guilt in Trevor's eyes. He knew what he'd done, and now I did too.
The ship was massive. I stood at the terminal in Seattle, boarding pass in hand, staring up at the white hull of the Northern Star. 12 decks, 2,000 passengers, a floating city that would carry me north into waters I'd never see again, or so Trevor thought. The line moved slowly. Families with excited children, couples holding hands, retirees with matching visors and cameras around their necks, and me, alone. I scanned my boarding pass at the gate. A cheerful crew member welcomed me aboard with a smile that felt too bright for what I was walking into. "Enjoy your voyage, Mr. Mercer." I nodded and stepped onto the ship. Cabin 9D was small but clean. A single bed, a narrow window overlooking the ocean, a desk with hotel stationery, and a welcome packet. I set my suitcase down and pulled out Rita's journal, my journal now, and began documenting. October 18th, 4:47 p.m. Boarded Northern Star, cabin 9D, deck 9, starboard side. Crew member at check-in, name tag read Lena. Logged my boarding time in system. I photographed the room, the welcome packet, the itinerary taped to the wall. Then I opened the cruise line's app on my phone and checked the booking details. Under reservation notes, I found what I was looking for. Booked by Coastal Travel Partners, LLC. Agent T. Mercer. Trevor had used a third-party booking service, probably thought it would create distance, make it harder to trace it back to him. But it was right there. His name. His digital fingerprint. I took a screenshot and emailed it to myself, then to Rachel, with the subject line that read, Evidence Part 1. That night, I stood on the deck as the ship pulled away from Seattle. The city lights glittered against the water, shrinking into the distance as the engines rummed beneath my feet. The ocean stretched out ahead, dark, endless, uncertain. I thought about Rita. She would have loved this. The salt air, the sound of the waves, the way the horizon disappeared into nothing, leaving only possibility. I closed my eyes and heard her voice, as clear as if she were standing beside me. "Don't let the silence win, Jackson." She'd said that to me once years ago when I'd lost my job and spent weeks sitting in the dark, too ashamed to tell anyone. She'd pulled me out of that chair, made me shower, made me face the world again. Silence is just fear dressed up as stillness. You're louder than that. I opened my eyes. She was right. I wasn't here to disappear. I was here to prove I was still alive, still sharp, still capable, still someone who couldn't be erased with a glossy brochure and a falsified smile. Over the next 2 days, I mapped the ship. Security cameras on every deck, medical staff on deck 3, lifeboats checked and logged daily. I asked questions, polite, harmless, forgettable. How often do they review security footage? What happens if someone gets sick? Do you keep records of all passenger incidents? The crew answered without suspicion. I was just another curious old man. But I wasn't. I was building a case. Because if something happened to me on this ship, if I accidentally fell overboard, if I had a sudden heart attack, if I simply vanished, Trevor and Vanessa would collect their $500,000 and sleep soundly. Unless I made sure the truth stayed loud enough to outlive me. I returned to my cabin and wrote one more line in Rita's journal. They sent me here to die. I'm going to make sure they regret it.
I knew something was wrong on the third night. The man appeared at dinner, mid-40s, nondescript, khaki pants, polo shirt, the kind of face you forget 5 minutes after seeing it. He sat 3 tables away, alone, nursing a glass of whiskey, and watching me. Not obviously, just consistently. I'd learned to notice things like that. When I left the dining hall, he followed, not close enough to be threatening, just close enough to track. I took the long route back to my cabin, weaving through corridors and stopping at the gift shop to buy a postcard I didn't need. He stayed 10 paces behind the entire time. When I finally reached deck 9, I didn't go to my cabin. I went to deck 7. 2 days earlier, I'd befriended a couple from Portland, Gordon and Sienna, who were celebrating their 30th anniversary. Nice people, chatty. They'd mentioned their cabin number over drinks, 7B, 2 decks below mine. I'd also mentioned, casually, that my cabin had a better view, and I'd be happy to switch with them for the last few nights if they wanted the upgrade. Sienna had laughed. You'd really do that? I'm an old man. Views don't matter as much as they used to. Besides, I like being closer to the action. They'd agreed. We switched key cards that afternoon. No paperwork, no official record. Cabin 9D, my original room, now belonged to Gordon. I was in 7B. At 2:17 a.m., I woke to the sound of sirens. I pulled on my jacket and stepped into the hallway. Other passengers were emerging from their rooms, confused, murmuring. A crew member rushed past, radio crackling. Medical emergency, deck 9, all personnel respond. My heart pounded. I made my way up the stairs, blending into the crowd of onlookers gathering near the railing. Security had cordoned off the area around cabin 9D. Through the glass door, I could see Gordon sitting on the bed, pale and shaking, while paramedics checked his vitals. His cabin door had been forced open. A syringe lay on the floor. Someone had tried to inject him with something. By morning, the ship was buzzing. The attempted assault was all anyone could talk about. The authorities on board had detained a man, the same man who'd followed me at dinner. A background check revealed a prior conviction for fraud. Financial records showed a wire transfer of $15,000 into his account 3 days before the cruise. The transfer came from an account registered to Coastal Travel Partners, LLC, Trevor's booking agency.
Rachel called me at noon. "Jackson, it's happening. The FBI contacted Prescott PD this morning. They've been monitoring Trevor and Vanessa's accounts since I submitted your evidence." I gripped the phone. "And?" "This morning, Vanessa tried to file the life insurance claim. Said you died of a heart attack on board. She even had a forged death certificate from a ship medical officer." I exhaled slowly. "Jackson?" Rachel's voice softened. "You okay?" "Yeah," I whispered. "I'm okay." "They arrested them an hour ago," Rachel continued. "Both of them. Conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, the works." I sat down on the edge of the bed, the weight of it all finally settling. That afternoon, I stood on the deck and watched the coastline of Alaska drift past. The sky was gray, the water dark and endless. I thought about Trevor, about the boy who'd once held my hand crossing the street, about the man who'd tried to erase me from money. And I thought about Rita, who taught me that silence was just fear dressed up as stillness. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the horizon. Then I sent it to Rachel with a single line, "Still breathing." She replied instantly, "Good. Don't stop." I smiled. I didn't plan to.
The courtroom smelled like old wood and stale coffee. I sat in the front row, hands folded in my lap, watching my son being led in wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. He looked smaller than I remembered, thinner. His eyes were red-rimmed, hollow. Vanessa sat beside him, chin up, expression blank. She didn't look at me once. The trial lasted 3 days. The prosecution presented everything: the notebook entries, the emails, the wire transfers to the man who'd tried to kill Gordon. They played recorded jail calls where Vanessa coached Trevor on what to say, how to spin the story, how to claim it was all a misunderstanding. "We were just trying to help him," she'd said in one call. "He was confused, losing his memory. We thought the cruise would be good for him." The jury didn't buy it. On the second day, they called me to the stand. The prosecutor was a woman named Mallory Chen. Sharp, efficient, kind. She asked me to walk through the timeline, the phone calls, the overheard conversation, the journal I'd found. I answered each question slowly, carefully. My voice shook, but I didn't stop. Then she asked the question I'd been dreading. "Mr. Mercer, do you believe your son intended to kill you?" The courtroom went silent. I looked at Trevor. He was staring at the table, shoulders hunched, tears streaming down his face. "Yes," I said quietly. "I believe he did." Trevor's lawyer stood. "Objection. Speculation." "Overruled," the judge said. "The witness may answer based on his personal belief." Mallory continued. "And how does that make you feel?" I took a breath. "It makes me feel like I failed him." My voice cracked. "Because somewhere along the way, I raised a son who thought money was worth more than his father's life. And I don't know where I went wrong." Trevor's head dropped into his hands. His sobs echoed through the courtroom. Vanessa stared straight ahead, unmoved. The defense tried to paint Trevor as desperate, drowning in debt, coerced by his manipulative wife. They argued he'd never meant it for it to go that far, that he'd just been trying to survive. But the evidence didn't lie. The notebook, the emails, the hired man, the insurance claim filed while I was still alive. On the third day, the jury deliberated for 2 hours.
Guilty on all counts. Trevor broke down as the verdict was read. Vanessa's face remained stone. The judge sentenced them both. 15 years for conspiracy to commit murder and 5 for insurance fraud, to be served consecutively. 20 years. After the sentencing, I stood outside the courthouse while reporters swarmed me. Rachel was beside me, her hand on my shoulder. One of them shoved a microphone in my face. "Mr. Mercer, do you forgive your son?" I looked back at the courthouse, at the building where justice had been served, but nothing had been healed. I loved my son enough to forgive him, but not enough to forget. The reporter nodded and pulled back. Rachel squeezed my shoulder. "Ready to go home?" I nodded. As we walked to her car, I thought about Rita, about the roses still blooming in our yard, about the silence that no longer felt suffocating. I survived, not because I was stronger than them, but because I'd refused to let their cruelty erase me. And that, I realized, was enough.
Spring came slowly to Prescott. I was kneeling in the garden, hands deep in soil, when Rachel's car pulled into the driveway. She'd started coming by twice a week, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with nothing but conversation. Today, she carried a flat of seedlings. "Thought you could use some color," she said, setting them down beside me. "Petunias, Rita's favorite, right?" I looked up at her, squinting against the afternoon sun. "How'd you know?" "She mentioned it once, at Millie's," she smiled. "I pay attention." We planted them together, side by side, filling the gaps where the roses had struggled. The work was slow, meditative, the kind of quiet that didn't feel heavy anymore. "You hear from him?" Rachel asked after a while. I didn't have to ask who she meant. A letter came yesterday. She glanced at me, dirt smudged on her cheek. "Read it?" I did. The letter had been 4 pages long, handwritten on prison stationery. Trevor's handwriting had always been messy, but this was worse. Shaky, uneven, like his hand couldn't keep up with his thoughts. "Dad, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve the chance to ask, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. Not because I got caught, not because I'm sitting in a cell, but because I let fear turn me into someone I don't recognize. I told myself it was survival, that we were drowning and you were the only way out. But the truth is, I was a coward. I convinced myself your life was worth less than my comfort, and I'll spend the rest of mine knowing that. Vanessa doesn't feel the same. She still thinks we were justified, that you would have died soon anyway. I can't be married to someone like that anymore. The divorce papers are being filed next month. I don't know what happens when I get out. I don't know if I'll have anything left, but I wanted you to know that I remember who you were to me. The dad who taught me to ride a bike, who stayed up with me when I had nightmares, who told me I could be anything. I'm sorry I forgot that man existed. I'm sorry I became someone who could hurt him. Trevor. I'd read it twice. Then I'd carried it outside to the fire pit behind the house and burned it. Not out of anger, not even out of spite, but because some things don't need to be held on to. Rachel and I finished planting as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. God's favorite colors, Rita used to say. "You think you'll ever talk to him again?" Rachel asked, brushing dirt off her knees. I stood slowly, my joints protesting. "Maybe. Someday. When I'm ready." "And when will that be?" I looked at the garden, at the roses Rita had planted,
at the petunias we'd just added, and at the life that was blooming again despite everything. When the silence stops feeling like a wound and starts feeling like peace, I said. Rachel nodded. She understood. We walked inside together, and for the first time in over a year, the house didn't feel empty. It felt mine. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and Rita's journal open on my lap. I turned to a blank page and wrote, I hadn't gone on that cruise to escape my life. I went to find it again. And I had. Not in the way Trevor intended, not through forgetting or disappearing, but through remembering who I was before the silence tried to swallow me whole. I closed the journal and looked up at the stars. Somewhere, Rita was smiling, and I was still here, still breathing, still loud. So here's my question for you. Was I right to handle it this way? Tell me in the comments below, what would you have done in my position? If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more real-life tales, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Because trust me, there's so much more on this channel. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next life story.